Rob Elsworthy, Resistor Interactive. Okay, who is that? Rob Elsworthy, game designer, previously worked at Rockstar on, wow, lots of big games. Metal Gear Solid, The Warriors, Manhunt 2, GTA 4, and I think all of its expansions, Red Dead Redemption, Max Payne 3, and GTA 5. And now it looks like he works for Resistor Interactive. I believe that is his own company. Okay, and what is that? Resistor Interactive. Games for the Revolutionary. Afro-Futurists Unite. We are Resistor, an indie studio with a mission. Got it. Okay, well, we have an experienced and knowledgeable expert in video game design and the industry itself, I have to assume. Let's see what we have in store for us today.
Is that we have some gamers in here tonight. How many black gamers do we have here? Well, there's a couple. Okay. This talk is for you guys, okay? Yeah.
Oh, this talk is only for black gamers? So, should I leave? Being the wrong skin color and all. I mean, Afro-Futurists Unite and all of that, right?
Right?
Also, just a note that the original video was edited with the many, many fast cuts you will no doubt notice as we proceed. They are jarring at times, and I have no idea if anything relevant was taken out of the presentation or not. So, you will just have to suffer along, as I have. Which is exactly how I like it.
All right, so my story starts in the 80s. Kid playing in the playground, like many of you guys, trying to find a role. These were the characters at the time that everybody was idolizing, and none of them looked like me. What used to happen was I would end up playing a secondary character or the bad guy because there wasn't anyone for me. The kids would be kind of brutal about it, and they would pick the guys who were the leads.
Okay, hold on a second. Characters didn't look like you. Well, I am assuming, given your introduction, you're specifically meaning black characters. So, 80s heroes lacked diversity. And, for example, you show G.I. Joe, which includes Roadblock, a black character. And you're also leaving out Doc, and Alpine, and Stalker, and Iceberg. Also, not mentioning Spirit, or Storm Shadow, or Scarlet, or Lady J. Let's just be honest. G.I. Joe is probably the worst argument for lack of diversity in 1980s kids fodder. As for action stars, oh, I'll grant you that the 1980s was probably a bit bereft of big-name black action heroes. So, let's just forget the 1990s and onward, shall we? Because, you know, things never change from the bad old days, do they?
I used to gravitate towards other kinds of characters, like the Ninja Turtles, for instance. There's no race there. I could be any one of them.
Aha. So, from a very early age, you were an identitarian. And even though you couldn't identify with characters who were not black because they did not look like you could identify with anthropomorphized animals and machines, which also did not look like you. You know, it's interesting that your lack of imagination begins and ends at human skin color.
It took years for me to actually understand that it was the fact that there wasn't any representation for me. There were no characters that looked like me.
And a hard cut to Samuel L. Jackson. And there were characters who looked like you. I mean, did you ever watch the A-Team as a kid? Who do you think became more popular and famous out of that show? George Peppard? Or Mr. T?
Distorted representation of reality. This is something that I think everybody should know in 2019. The media presents all kinds of images of black people doing violent acts disproportionately to what actually is happening in the world. In all kinds of media, it's the same thing. You see black gangbangers, you see roles that are tough black dudes doing dangerous things.
Wait, so first you complain that there aren't enough black action heroes, as in tough dudes who do dangerous and even violent things, but now you're complaining that the media portrays black men as only tough dudes who do violent things. Got it?
This leads to problems in the real world. Many problems. You've watched the news, you've seen black people getting shot in the streets.
Shot by whom, might I ask?
False calls. That's one of those ones that really triggers me when I hear people called somebody and somebody died because of that call, because of their fear. I like to jog, but when I do it in the evening, for instance, it's dangerous for me. I have to worry about getting calls. I have to worry about being stopped by the police. I have to worry about being accused falsely of doing something because I'm out in the evening time.
Do you have to worry because you've had false calls made on you? Or are you worrying because you're worrying? And do false calls only happen to black people? And why are they false calls? Any call made to police about something someone else perceives as suspicious, but turns out to be nothing, or a mistake is intentionally misleading? I'm not sure what I am meant to take from that.
I have to worry about people screaming. It happens a lot, actually. In broad daylight, somebody will turn and see me, and they will have a visceral reaction, and they will scream. This is grown men. This is young women. It doesn't matter who it is. It happens often.
Okay, seriously? People, grown men and women, just regularly turn, look at you, and scream. Because you're black? I am going to press X to doubt on that one.
All of these things have happened to me at some point or another. This has a psychological toll. This is something I don't hear about a lot. I see expressions on people's faces often of fear. And I don't want to spread that to other people, but it happens more than I would like. I have to deal with other people's fear.
Sorry, but I have to ask. Do people actually have expressions of fear on their faces? Or are you merely projecting fear into the expressions of other people? Because as of right now, you sound far more paranoid than you do persecuted.
So, for instance, I don't want to walk on the sidewalk behind you at night because I'm worried about how you're going to interpret it when you see me and what's going to happen after that.
Well, speaking for myself, I also have that same sensation if I end up walking behind someone at a similar pace, alone at night, or, well, alone at any time of the day, really. And I'm white. So, does that mean that I am a victim of my own self-consciousness as well?
It's not all bad. It's just the reality that I live in. And I wanted to share that with you guys today so you could understand that there are some different perspectives out there.
You live in a perpetual state of fear and paranoia that other people are afraid and paranoid about you because you're black. But it's not all bad. Got it.
This movie here, Get Out. Who's seen it? Yeah, okay. A lot of people seen this movie. This scene in particular was very triggering. I sat in the audience with a group, and everybody kind of jumped and screamed. It was a black dude running in the middle of the night towards the camera, and it freaked the heck out of everybody. It ties into that same message that we're getting all the time, that this is a dangerous thing, and he just veered off at the end. Nothing actually happened, but it did trigger everybody in the audience.
So, a black guy running down the road freaked you out, triggered you, even though nothing really happened. Just a black guy running down the road. Got it.
How does this affect the games industry? What am I even talking about right now? These are all personal stories.
That is exactly what I have been wondering since this talk began.
The games industry is young. We have a lot of new storytellers. Film's been around for 125 years or more, right?
Right?
Video games, a lot less than that. We're still learning. And I would say that we're at least 10 years behind mainstream media as far as the messages coming out.
10 years behind how? What messages? Are you going to get into some specifics at some point? Maybe some statistics? Anything concrete?
I'm seeing new shows every day that are starting to deal with diversity. They're adding characters in there and making things a little more interesting for people like me. But the games industry is not adapting as fast as it could.
Specifics, if you please.
So this image, I blurred it to protect the innocent here. Just looked on the internet and looked up every game studio that I could find. I saw maybe 3 black people in total in this collection. It wasn't curated in any way. I just grabbed everything I could.
So you cherry-picked photographs, and you've blurred out people's faces, because you are less concerned with who these people are than what their skin color is. And thus, I am to assume that the video game industry is inherently racist, despite your having a successful career within it. Got it.
You'll notice that it actually does reflect the data. So this was a study. They found that this is exactly what the makeup of game companies is. It actually is the same. I was that African-American 1%. So I definitely have some insight into what that's like working in a game studio.
Okay, and you have been working in video games spanning at least 15 years on some of the biggest AAA titles in modern times. But your coworkers weren't black enough for you. Got it.
How is it for women? Is it any different for them? You can see some stats here. 46% of video game players are women in 2019, but are represented by 27.8% of them in actual jobs making the games. It explains why you see a lot of juvenile messages, why you see all kinds of ridiculous revealing armor, terrible posing, and misogyny towards women. It's because it's not made by them.
Oh, so creating attractive female characters who have the ability to outsmart, defeat, or even kill men is an expression of hatred for women. Got it. And am I to understand, then, that the only way for a character to be legitimately designed is if someone who looks like that character is the one designing it? Well, the lead character in your game is an attractive black female in a skin-tight suit. You're not female, but you're a man designing that female. So, are you a misogynist?
Only 15% of game characters are female, with only 10% playing primary characters. So they're off to the side. There aren't very many of them. There are some standouts. You got the Lara Crofts. There are some other characters that are coming out now that are starting to break the barriers a little bit more. We have black women now leading games, but we still have a very long way to go.
Oh, so there are game franchises that have made millions of dollars, spawned multiple sequels and movies over decades, but never mind all of that, it's not enough. What exactly would be enough for you, I wonder?
So you've hired some new people. Start looking out there and bring some people in, but then what? It's very difficult when you're on a team that is predominantly white, predominantly male, to have a voice.
Because white males are collectively oppressive to everyone else. So says our speaker. Got it.
You say something, you have an opinion, you see something as a red flag. How many of them are going to have the same view as you or understand any of the things that I've been saying tonight? They live a different life and they have different experiences. Most people are not in the door to even have that conversation.
Okay, first off, you are not imagining things. Some lady is whispering off camera and it's being picked up on some microphone or another. It is annoying, but there's nothing I can do about it. It doesn't last forever, though, so sorry about that, regardless. But back to our speaker. Living different lives and living different experiences creates diversity. But different lives and experiences are not what our speaker is focusing on here. He is only concerned with race and gender, neither of which inherently imparts special wisdom onto anyone about anything. Well, that is, unless you're a racist or a sexist. Then you might believe that to be the case.
One of the reasons why you wouldn't speak up is because it's very hard to get a job in the games industry in general. There's a huge desire to be in games. Everyone loves playing them. Everybody thinks it's glamorous to work on them. It's a lot of hard work, by the way.
So the bar for success in the games industry is relatively high. And you've been successful at it for at least 15 years because you worked hard. Got it.
Games have high production values and marketing that's through the roof. They're big and shiny. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars making them. If the message is there or not, the games still sell. Marketing alone makes a lot of these products get on your consoles and your PCs.
Do video games need to always have a message in our speaker's mind? Are they not allowed to just be, I don't know, fun?
Here are some game characters, some black males. I'm focusing on those because I understand it. They're all different kinds of representation in games that is having a similar problem.
A similar problem. But I thought you wanted black characters in video games.
You'll notice that most of them are shirtless. Most of them are massive. If I had an audio recording, you'd hear a bunch of gruff voices with a lot of jive talk and stuff from decades ago.
So the problem is that the black characters are massive, shirtless men talking in jive talk or slang. And being massive, shirtless smart mouths is a problem set next to the examples of characters you wished had looked like you back in the 1980s. Got it.
They're one-dimensional, they're caricatures, right?
Right?
And these stereotypes are harmful because people sometimes don't have interactions with black people on a day-to-day basis, and then this is what they're playing and seeing.
So you think that most people cannot differentiate between fiction and reality. The phrase, "takes one to know one," comes to mind.
What kind of ideas are you going to get from looking at stuff like that?
I don't know. Why don't you tell us what ideas you imagine people are getting from stuff like that?
I didn't put in all the shirtless shots there. A lot of them were from, back in the days in comic books, Black Goliath, Birdie.
Birdie? Did you just call the Falcon Birdie?
There's tons of characters that all have their chest exposed to tie into the power of a black man, and there's this mythology that they're big and strong, and that's where it's coming from.
So, black men being big and strong is mythology. Might I introduce you to your boy Pat?
Dreadlocks. I see them thrown on everyone. There's no understanding of the culture behind it. They look cool. So people just throw dreadlocks on everything when they want it to be edgy.
Dreadlocks are a hairstyle that have only been and can never be worn by anyone other than black people. And their use in video games is simply a sign of edginess on the part of a character designer. Got it.
Music-based powers. I mean, Overwatch just came out not that long ago. Afro-Brazilian dude, and he has a dubstep gun, I believe, and that's his power. I mean, black people in music, I get it, where you're going with that, but there's a lot of interesting things about Brazil that you might have been able to tap into.
Like the music of Brazil? Maybe? But seriously, music-based powers are a problem now. Got it.
Afro-Caribbean witch doctors and voodoo, another huge trope. We see it all the time. They're the boogeymen. It's a go-to when you just need somebody that's scary.
So you would rather the voodoo practitioners were white? Or are you saying there are no villains in video games with a Judeo-Christian or white religious aesthetic? Because I have got some news for you.
When representation is done wrong, you get things like this.
When it's done wrong, you get things like this. So, non-white heroes of the resistance in an interracial romantic relationship. That is representation done wrong. It's not that the entirety of the writing of The Last Jedi was wrong. Got it.
We have some Star Wars characters that they just kind of sprinkled through it.
Sprinkled through it. I'm sorry, how fringe of a character was Finn in The Force Awakens again? How little screen time was afforded Rose Tycho as she fought to save the space llamas? What are you talking about?
I like the fact that I'm seeing different faces in media now, but there needs to be more done about the actual culture of these people. They don't have any culture. I don't feel like any of these people did.
You're going to have to define culture in this context, because Finn's culture was having been effectively conscripted and raised to be a warrior in a fascist military organization from which he broke free and then fought back against. In a fictional universe.
Jar Jar Binks, a terribly racist character. I remember sitting in that movie theater going like, what is happening right now? It ruined a lot of people's interpretation of Star Wars.
Yes, Jar Jar Binks was indeed a ridiculously goofy character. But I think the prequels, overall, ruined the reputation of Star Wars for many fans. I wouldn't shoulder Jar Jar Binks with the entirety of that burden.
I couldn't watch the movies after that. This guy thought about committing suicide after this. So it was serious for him as well. It affected a lot of people poorly because somebody couldn't understand that maybe it wasn't the right move to make him sound like an old slave.
Yes, it can be argued that George Lucas was culturally tone-deaf, stipulated. And this has what to do with video games again? I mean, this talk is called Chasing Equality in Games. So, are we going to get back to games?
Tokenism. I remember a huge outcry about Daredevil years ago. If anybody knows comics, knows Spider-Man, the Kingpin was this massive white New Yorker, just this huge, huge man. And the only guy they thought physically who could play him was Michael Clark Duncan, the guy who did The Green Mile.
So, Michael Clark Duncan was black, but the character was canonically white. I wonder if Michael Clark Duncan had anything to say on that subject. He spoke on the fans' loyalty to the source material by saying, quote, "They watch movies to say, hey, that's not like the comic book. But I want them to get past that and just see the movie for what it is, and see me for what I am. An actor." Unquote. Yes, well, I guess our speaker is just unwilling to see an actor rather than a skin color.
It's fine to find somebody physically that can support the role, but why not make a new character? Why not have somebody new that he can portray? Why shoehorn an old character just for the sake of diversity? There was no explanation for it, it just was.
Okay, now on that point, I can generally agree. Between female Thor and Riri Williams and the like, creating an original character rather than just having a diversity hire take up an established mantle is a far more preferable choice. But a portrayal of an established character by someone who does not necessarily resemble the canon look of a character? Personally, I don't care so much unless somehow the character's race or gender or whatever is an inherent part of the plot or of the character's arc. But even then, such things can be rewritten. And even then, Al Pacino isn't Cuban, but he became an icon playing Scarface. Now, am I a fan of recasting a character merely for the sake of pandering to the woke social justice crowd? Not at all. But at the same time, good writing and a good performance will outpace the aesthetics of a character more often than not, whatever the casting motivations are in the current zeitgeist.
This to me is the opposite of diversity. I don't know how many of you guys actually went in the theater and watched this film. I did because I do the research. There are no Egyptians in this movie. These are the gods of Egypt. That's the whole name of the title. And this continues to happen. There was blackface before. People would play Native Americans, and they were all white, right?
Right?
Why is it still happening now? I'm sure that there are enough Egyptian actors out there to take on these roles.
Sure. But are there enough Egyptian actors out there with the name recognition and star power to convince investors to gamble on a big budget film like Gods of Egypt? I mean, you've worked in the game industry. You must have some understanding of the harsh realities of the entertainment business. It's easy to be flippant about all of the mechanics and hard work and deal making that go into a production, even if it turns out to be a flop, when you're on the outside of it. Not that I have any experience doing that myself, or anything.
What does it look like when it's done right? 20 years ago, Marvel started it all off. This was the big hit for them, the $131 million US internationally for Blade. This had a huge impact on me. He was cool, he had martial skill, he was focused, he was unapologetic, he said what he thought, and I love that about him.
So, you love Blade. A black, tough dude who does violent and dangerous things, is huge and shows off his bare chest, who feeds into the mythology of the powerful black man. You love this character. A character created by two white guys. You know, I am getting some really mixed signals from you.
It took another 20 years before I found another one, and that was Black Panther. I mean, you guys have all seen Black Panther now, and look at the success of that movie.
It took you 20 years to find another black male hero that you liked. In all of that time, no other black male characters impressed you. Got it.
What went differently about Black Panther that was such a huge hit?
That it was a Marvel film, combined with a bewildering amount of the corporate media hyping up the virtue-signaling necessity of promoting and praising it far, far beyond its actual quality as a Marvel movie, let alone a movie in general. I mean, I liked it all right, but it didn't wow me or anything. Winter Soldier, Infinity War, and the first Iron Man are still my top 3 Marvel movies. But, hey, who cares? Disney still got my Black Panther ticket money.
It's the times. That's part of it, right?
Right?
But also the cast, the director, we're all black people. They understood the material. They took time and care to understand the material. They didn't just read a couple comic books and think that they had it. They did research on African architecture and made sure that that was part of their project. The 10th biggest film gross ever. Pretty impressive stuff.
Oh, I won't argue that much of the costume design, set design, and overall aesthetic of the film was really cool. But if having a majority black cast and crew who do a lot of work on a film is all that is needed to make a billion-dollar movie, why did If Beale Street Could Talk, inarguably a better piece of cinema than Black Panther, why did that movie barely make back its production budget?
Why does diversity matter? I've given you several reasons during the course of this conversation. It matters for the children who are looking for role models.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
It was me when I was a child. There was no representation. There wasn't anyone who looked like me.
Yes, there was.
I would like to provide that for the next generation so that they can be the hero, so that they can be the leader of the group because that person looks like them. They're not excluded because they don't.
Yes, if only we had some examples of non-white people who became successful leaders and role models in our world. I guess we can only dream.
It matters to people who don't know that there's others out there like them. There's all kinds of people who connect in games, who find groups and tribes out there. It's nice to know that you can visually represent yourself and be accepted on the same level.
Well, I guess if you're a rabid identitarian, it's nice.
There are so many experiences out there. I've shared a couple with you today of just what my life is like. A lot more that I could say about that, but every one of you in this room has some story that would be fantastic to share. Some of those ideas could be made into games. Some of those could be stories for games. But if you're not in the room, if you're not on the team, how are you going to be able to do that?
Wow, what a jarring series of completely unnecessary jump cuts to finish off that talk. Anyway, I'm not quite sure what we saw there. I went into this imagining, by the title and by our speaker's resume, that we were going to hear something about equality in games. Instead, we were only on the receiving end of our speaker's personal and wholly contradictory racial discriminations, where action heroes are desired, but violent men with their chests bared are damaging stereotypes. And you know, given his professional pedigree and his incessant demand for non-white video game characters, I am amazed he did not at least give an honorable mention to one of my favorite games and, arguably, the best game in the Grand Theft Auto franchise, San Andreas. I don't know. Somehow, even for someone with my skin color, I really enjoyed playing that game. But in our speaker's world, it seems, pleasure in playing is predicated on the predominant palette of the proper pixels running parallel to one's own personal pigment. But, hey, what do I know? I mean, my avatar is white. As always, thank you for watching.